Hello, my name is Dr. Shane Watt. I'm the doctor and the treating physician at Neurobolic Health Center, located in South Jordan, Utah. Today we're going to discuss thyroid. Now, hopefully it's easily for you to understand. This is going to be a part one of our videos on thyroid and how it functions. But one thing I want you to know is that hopefully when you're done with this, you'll understand about how the thyroid functions, probably even more than your medical doctor will, or than what they know. Unfortunately, most of the medical model relies on pharmaceutical reps. And pharmaceutical reps are only doing what? Selling drugs. So let's get into this and let's explain how the thyroid works. So the hypothalamus, it's a little part in the brain. It sends a hormone called TRH, thyroid releasing hormone, to the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland then sends a hormone called TSH to the thyroid gland. Now, most people have heard of TSH. In fact, in the medical model, they refer to it as the gold standard. Now, most lab values are between 0.5 and 5.0. Functional ranges are between 1.8 and 3.0. What does that mean? Well, most people that go and get blood work are two categories: yearly physicals, or they're sick. Unfortunately, this can skew the lab values because it's based on a bell curve. So what I do in my office is we go off of what is called the functional ranges. That's why so many people that are within the normal limits feel like they still have a lot of thyroid issues. Our thyroid controls our metabolism. Now let's go in a little bit more on how this thing functions for you. So, once again, hypothalamus stimulates the pituitary gland. Something that you need to be aware of also is the pituitary gland also stimulates progesterone and estrogen. Kind of an interesting thought. The reason is most people have thyroid problems. Majority of them are women, also have hormonal issues. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail down the road. The thyroid gland makes two hormones, T4 and T3. T3 is what we need, but it only produces about 7%. T4 is what we don't need. We need it to be changed to T3, but it produces about 93% of the T4. And how it does that is by the TPO enzyme. TPO enzyme is what is needed in order for tyrosine and iodine to come together to become the hormone, the thyroid hormone, which once again is T3 and T4. And all it means is there's 4 molecules of iodine and 3 molecules of iodine mixed with a tyrosine, depending on whether it's T3 or T4. One of the things that is the most frustrating thing is that most people go to their doctor, they see that their lab values are off, and their doctor says, hey, let's put you on a medication. A Synthroid type medication. Synthroid's been around for 50 plus years. Okay, most of the science is based on Synthroid. Now, here's our problem. Basically, you ingest the medication, it gets into your bloodstream, it goes to the pituitary gland, and now the pituitary gland thinks it has enough T4. Well, if your body thinks it has enough of something, it doesn't feel like it needs to produce more of it. Think about that. So what happens is, now because you're being medicated, your body then thinks it doesn't need to make any more. And so what happens is it reduces your TSH level. So when it reduces your TSH level, your lab values that were now out of range can possibly either come down or go into range. And what happens? Your medical doctor says, see, I fixed you. We're good. You're doing good. We've got you on the right medication. It's going to work for you. And yet you still don't feel well. And yet you still have problems. You still have all these other issues. Why? Well, because there's so much more to it than that. There's so much more than just fixing a lab value. Let's explain. So in order for it to be converted, our T4 needs to get together with what is called thyroid binding globulin. I just call it our bus. Gets on a bus and it goes to two different places in order for it to be converted. The first place it goes to is the liver, and it does about 60% of the conversion in the liver. The other place it goes to is the gut, and it does about 20% in the gut. From there, it's now what we refer to as free T3, and that's the active form. And that needs to get into the cell. So here we have a receptor and we have the hormone. The receptor and the hormone, these together, are what are called like a lock and key mechanism. They have to work properly. If there's gunk in the lock, the key's not going to work. If it gets in, we have mRNA stimulates metabolism of fats, carbs, and proteins. So right here, you're getting a basic understanding of how this all works. Unfortunately, for most individuals, they're monitored from there up. Because if you think about it, does the TSH really tell you how the thyroid is functioning? Think about it. I don't think so. It tells you what? It actually tells you if the pituitary is sending enough hormone to the thyroid. It doesn't tell us whether our thyroid is functioning properly or not. So if you really want to look at it this way, your case is basically being managed from here up. Well, that's why we have success, and that's why you haven't had success. You've been mismanaged. We have success because we're looking at this whole big picture. And this isn't even the big picture. Let's get into more of this so you can understand why there's more to it. From the hypothalamus to the cell entry, there's more than 10 metabolic steps. Let's go through a couple of these really quickly. We have the thyroid releasing hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone. Those are a couple of steps. And remember, gold standard, gold standard, gold standard. That's what your doctor looks at. Every once in a while, they'll do a T4 test. And usually that's if you're begging them to. They really never ever do any more tests than that unless you're demanding it. But if you're the patient, why should you be demanding it? Now, I think that's great because you are ultimately responsible for your health. But shouldn't the doctor know to look further? The reason they don't is because it doesn't change their protocol. If testing doesn't change protocol, insurances don't want to pay for it. And if you're in the insurance-based medical model, that's what you get. So remember, gold standard. 3, 4, and 5 of those 10 steps are the TPO enzyme, the tyrosine, the iodine. So let's look at this. The gold standard basically checks 3 to 4 out of 10 steps. Now, if you were in the Olympics and you got a 3 or 4 out of 10, would you win the gold medal? Absolutely not. You wouldn't even place. You wouldn't even place and stand on the podium, right? That's why this test is not the only and best test. There's other things we have to address and have to look at. Here's where some problems can come into play. In the hypothalamus, if you have dopamine and serotonin issues, which unfortunately many of you do, it's the happy hormone, or happy neurotransmitter, I should say. Most of you aren't happy. Most of you don't feel good. Most of you have been put on antidepressants, which are serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and they don't even realize that it might be a possibility because there's some thyroid stuff going on. Does that make sense? It's just another symptom that they're treating. We don't treat your thyroid. We don't treat your symptoms. We want to treat your body. We want to help your body to get the systems turned on and functioning properly. Pituitary gland. If you have issues with cortisol, it decreases the responsiveness of the pituitary gland. Well, do you want good response or bad response? What is the cortisol? Cortisol is your stress hormone. If you're okay, think about this. Are you stressed? I would venture to say yes. If you're healthy, you're stressed. If you're not healthy, you're stressed. If you're rich, you're stressed. If you're poor, you're stressed. Everybody has stresses. I got 6 kids. I'm dealing with a lot of stresses, right? I would think that cortisol level is very important. Is it affecting your pituitary? And therefore, the rest of the downstream effects. Got to look at that. On the TPO enzyme, If we have decreased progesterone, once again, this is about a 24-to-1 ratio for women over men. And part of that is because the hormonal fluctuations you have throughout your life when you're cycling. Decreased progesterone. A lot of people have issues with this. A lot of people have issues with this. There's multiple factors. One of the biggest ones, if you were on a pill to prevent pregnancy for a long period of time, you will have progesterone issues, especially decreased progesterone, just because of the way the anatomy and physiology works. That's what happens. What are some other problems we have? Well, that decreased progesterone affects the TPO enzyme, which then affects the allowing of the T4 and T3 hormone to be made, which then affects the thyroid binding globulin and our bus, getting us to the other areas. Well, what can happen in the other areas? Unfortunately, way too many things. In the liver, if we have cortisol issues, we have selenium issues. So increased cortisol, decreased selenium, decreased zinc, which unfortunately a lot of people do and they don't realize it because of a methylation problem, and increased testosterone, we can have decreased of that conversion from T4 to T3 in the liver. In the gut, what can happen? Well, there's an enzyme called intestinal solvutase. And unfortunately, most people, once again, most people have all these things, unfortunately, and they're dealing with thyroid. It's not just one thing. It's not just a thyroid magic pill, fix me. There's all kinds of other issues going on, as you can see right now, right? So in the gut, if we don't have intestinal solvutase, which is a digestive enzyme, which once again, most people have digestive problems, that's what helps convert T3S and T3SP. Now, don't worry about that. That's not important. But that's how we get into the free T3 to get into the cell. So right now, think of how much stuff now in your mind, it's probably spinning going, wow, how do you know I have that? Wow, I have that. I have that. Well, why is it so important to get into the cell? Because every hormone in your body, every cell in your body has hormone receptors for thyroid. That's why there's so many problems with thyroid. There's fatigue, because what is metabolism? It slows everything down. There's weight issues, because it slows everything down. There's hormonal issues. There's digestive issues. Cold hands, cold feet. There's hair falling out, and multiple other symptoms and problems because of thyroid. Why? Because the hormone is not getting into the cell. What are some other factors that affect it getting into the cell? Well, it's proper fatty acids. Well, we don't eat good. Our American diet is horrible. Watch TV and see what people eat. We don't eat good. Our fatty acids are, 20-to-1 ratio out of whack. From our good fats to bad fats. Well, this outer layer right here is a lipid bilayer. That's fat. And so if our fats are messed up, it affects our cell receptor and hormone. That lock and key mechanism. Vitamins, especially vitamin A, can affect that. Homocysteine. Homocysteine is what? It's inflammatory. And homocysteine is what is causing so many issues that no one knows about. There's so much I could go in on that. But homocysteine is traveling through the system in the blood supply. It's inflammatory. That's why we have all these inflammatory conditions, is homocysteine. Estrogens. Once again, women, unfortunately for you, what happens with your estrogens throughout your life? Up and down, right? Because your cycle. There's another issue, plastics or xenoestrogens, because of what is called BPA. BPA and xenoestrogens are fake estrogens that get into our body and look like estrogens. And what does that do? It affects our cell and the ability for that hormone to get into the cell. So let's go through this really quickly. Once again, dopamine, serotonin can affect our hypothalamus. Are we happy or are we not happy? Is there probably an issue there? Cortisol, if we're stressed or are we not stressed? How does it affect the pituitary gland? The progesterone affecting the TPO enzyme. In the liver, the cortisol, selenium, the zinc, the testosterone. In the gut, intestinal solvutase. In the cell, fatty acids, vitamins, homocysteine, estrogens, plastics, they all affect. Now do you understand why you haven't had success in the treatment model you've been in? That's what you've been getting. Here up. Has anyone really looked at these for you? I would venture to say no. In fact, most of the time, what do? They think it's a totally separate issue, and they just give you a pill. They just give you a pill because, oh, you're not happy. They just give you a pill because, oh, you're kind of stressed. They just give you a pill because of anxiety or something like that, right? Or we have, oh, you have a gut problem, so we're going to give you antacids. That's a whole other lecture, which we have as well. All these things affect you. And all these things we look at, and I look at, to try to get you well. And no one else is doing it. That's why we have success, and that's why you haven't had success. Because in reality, your case has been mismanaged. I think you would agree with me by now. Now, with all that education being said, unfortunately for most of you, 70% of you, it doesn't truly matter. And the reason is because you have another condition. And that other condition is, it's autoimmune. It's Hashimoto's. Hashimoto's was discovered in 1912 by Dr. Hashimoto. Now, we're going to have another lecture on this. That's going to be part 2. But just to give you a couple of tidbits on it, 70% of you have it. It doesn't get tested for most of the time. Why? Because your endocrinologist, your specialist, does not do anything to help that. Doesn't do anything to affect autoimmune. What's autoimmune? Autoimmune is yourself going kind of crazy and attacking its own tissues. And there's multiple reasons why, and we'll discuss that in part 2. But Hashimoto's is an autoimmune condition. If 70+% of you have that, you're very much so being misdiagnosed as well as mismanaged. So that's something that's very critical for you to know. So stay tuned for, or look up on YouTube, our part 2 of this series. So hopefully you've got a lot of good education. Hopefully this has been good for you. You've realized a few things. Review it multiple times. And please pass it on to other friends and family, because unfortunately there's a lot of people that are suffering with thyroid conditions. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't even know they have thyroid conditions. They assume they do, but they're not out of range in their labs, and so their doctors won't do anything for them. But if you feel like your case has been mismanaged, if you feel like this education has been good for you, remember, education only works if you use it. So, please give my office a call, and if I'm not in the area you are, I can always find one of my friends and colleagues that is on the neurological metabolic group that I'm in that we can send you to. So once again, my name is Dr. Shane Watt. I appreciate your time. I'm of the neuro... Right at the end, now I screw up. My office is the Neurobolic Health Center. Once again, Dr. Shane Watt, South Jordan, Utah. My phone number is 801-495-4444. And you can reach me at my email, which is whatisupdoc@yahoo.com. Once again, that's whatisupdoc@yahoo.com. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. Have yourself a very wonderful and healthy day.